Really, it's getting close to 2 years since President Ballot assumed office as the Commander-in-Chief of the Nigerian Armed Forces, having been declared winner of the last presidential election by the Independent National Electoral Commission. His election triggered a wave of litigations, which somehow trickled down to the governorship, national, and state assembly elections. Even with the Electoral Act 2022 as amended, recommending a 180-day window for results to be contested before the courts, a lot of the cases ultimately could not be resolved, and the cumulative impact appears to be a further heating up of the polity, with less than 2 years to when the first ballot will be cast in the 2027 elections. Now, our guest is the Executive Director of the Policy and Legal Advocacy Center and convener of the Civil Society Situation Room, Clement Nwankwo. Clark has already done a report from Ballot to the courts. Now, Clement Nwankwo, thank you very much for joining us. I hope that the audio connection is now in order. Can you hear me?
Thank you, Ruben. My privilege to be on the program. I can hear you quite well now. Just one correction. I am only at this time the Executive Director of Policy and Legal Advocacy Center. I was convener Situation Room for 10 years, and that ended about 3 years ago.
Okay, you are now a retired convener, but you are still very active in the space for policy advocacy and electoral reform. But tell us about this report, about your findings, Plaque's findings with regard to the 2023 elections, and what you think Nigerians should be focusing upon as we prepare for 2027.
I think in Nigeria, when people prepare for elections, apart from dealing with the politics and political parties, they also deal with INEC, and then they deal with the judiciary. We've gone past the election phase. What we did right after the election petitions ended was to work in collaboration and with the support of the judiciary to collate the reports from the election petition tribunals, from the Court of Appeal, and right up to the Supreme Court. First of all, even before the elections, we had collaborated with the judiciary in a program supported by the European Union, looking at how to work with judges, prepare judges to handle election petitions. The Court of Appeal did train judges to handle election petitions. We worked with that process, and at the end of the elections, the petition tribunals began to sit. The Court of Appeal deployed judges, and what we did was to wait for the election petitions to conclude at all the levels, including the presidential level at the Supreme Court, and then began to collate the reports from these tribunals and from the different courts, provided some analysis of the decisions that were reached. Part of it is really to document what is going on with the courts, so that the courts will have records that will help in collating and holding for the purpose of even future elections, how decisions have been reached, what kind of decisions have been made. We have done a summary of all of this and provided a report that we think would help a lot in future election petitions in the country. We looked at more than 100,000 pages of different court judgments and reports, hundreds of reports and cases from the courts, and have provided this both in hard copy but also online, so that even for lawyers who are going to be filing petitions in the future, they would be able to look at this. For judges who would be appointed newly into any future election petition tribunals, they would be able to see this. The courts operate on the basis of decisions that have been made and those being able to guide future decisions. So in our sense of it, the doctrine, whether it's of stare decisis or indeed any other legal principle, these decisions which we have documented and analyzed, we hope would help to enrich future adjudication processes with petitions in the courts.
Okay, but if you could just take us through some of the key findings, particularly some of the issues raised in the document about local standing, for example, about electoral processes, and what you think, the recommendations that you have made. Will you be recommending a further amendment of the Electoral Act ahead of 2027? And how early? When?
Yes. Well, a couple of things going on. We realize, of course, that 2027 may not be that far away as people imagine. This is 2025. In less than a year, the Independent National Electoral Commission will be issuing notices of elections. Indeed, you will begin to have the parties conduct their primaries. When you look at the decisions, the report that we have put together, we found that there were at least 73% of cases that we did not have the lawyers been able to prove their cases. A lot of times, of course, the judiciary is criticized, rightly so, but a lot of times maybe not rightly so. Lawyers have a lot of work to do to prepare for their cases. And when we look at the cases that were filed, 73% were cases where lawyers really couldn't prove their cases for different reasons. About 11% were cases where lawyers had gone to court without understanding the issue of jurisdiction, and the courts threw out the cases. There were some that were thrown out simply because there were not enough evidence to prove petitions. But of course, there were cases that we observed that appear to indicate miscarriage of justice, and there were several such cases. One of the most stark one, of course, was the case in Plateau State. But beyond that, several other issues that are observed in the report, which we hope people would be able to assess, particularly judges as they go to the next phase of election petitions, but also really candidates who are running for elections. Because I think a bigger concern for us in this country is the role played by the judiciary. Why is the judiciary deciding or determining how persons are getting elected? How is the judiciary getting involved so very much in how candidates emerge from the primaries of political parties? These are issues that are all considered and reported in this report that we have put together. Like I said, more than 11% of cases were thrown out simply because the courts declined jurisdiction, and those were related to matters that are related to the internal conflicts within political parties. And as we look at the parties today, we see it's even worse internal conflicts.
Okay, some of the recommendations will have to do with, for example, in the executive summary that I have seen, Section 137, which was a major issue in the Edo State Gubernatorial Election Petition Tribunal about oral evidence and documentary evidence. Another section will have to be Section 135, which is about substantial non-compliance. But what I find curious in the recommendations is that you are now recommending alternative dispute resolution as a way forward in election petitions. How feasible is that, considering the fact that politicians don't even want alternative dispute resolution? They just want the position. Why is a plaque recommending ADR when politics is about power and who gets there?
Well, this is not a major recommendation. It's a subtext, so to say. But a lot of times when people go to court, they use the courts as a basis for negotiation for power that you mentioned. So part of the reason we suggest ADR is that rather than politicians clog the court system with petitions, some of this can be resolved by some negotiations between the politicians, so to say. If you notice, a lot of and that's really sad for our country, a lot of judicial matters are kept on hold or kept pending during the heat period of election petitions and indeed election. And this is not good for our legal system. So part of what we have suggested, and this is not a main suggestion, but really just to get rid of some of the cases, is that the politicians and candidates and aspirants should have a process of negotiating amongst themselves so that the court system is not clogged by election disputes that probably don't even need to go to court.
Okay, you have an event on Wednesday where this report will be presented. Who and who will be there? And then, what do you expect as outcome? Because in this country, people write reports, they do analysis, and at the end of the day, these reports just end up on the shelves. Is there any, collaboration with INEC, with National Assembly, with other agencies, who can take some of these recommendations and run with them? Or this is just for the purpose of research and analysis and say, oh, at PLAC, we have played our own part. What are your expectations in terms of follow-up actions and outcomes?
I think there are lots of stakeholders in the room, and you mentioned them. I'm trying not to get into the meat of the report, which would be put out on Wednesday, and that's why I'm reneging a bit on disclosing or discussing the full contents of the report as this conversation. But we do have stakeholders from INEC, from the National Assembly, from the judiciary, civil society, observers, local and international diplomatic community. Really, I think the purpose for all of us is to see, and PLAC has a lot of role that PLAC is playing with each of the stakeholders in elections, whether it is INEC or the National Assembly, working towards reform that have arisen from the 2023 general election. So as we head to that election, part of the contents of this report, part of its recommendations, will form some of what we will go forward with as we work with the National Assembly, we work with INEC, and work with other stakeholders to improve the legal framework for elections in Nigeria. And we hope also that the report would be a critical document for judges who would be in election petitions in the 2027 general elections. We hope that the numbers of cases will severely drop, will reduce, but for whatever purpose that you do have petitions arise in 2027, this report will certainly be a huge resource, even for lawyers as well who would be going to tribunals. A lot of lawyers go to tribunals just for the merry-go-round of it without understanding how to advise their clients on whether they have a good case or not. So this is going to be a very good resource for everyone who is involved with elections in Nigeria.
Well, thank you very much, Clement Nwankwo, for joining us. And I hope that that report will be widely circulated, for the general public to study and comment upon and react to it also. Thank you very much.